We are talking Cybercab once again because it's all we can talk about, because it is the most exciting news of the week, unless you count new all-time highs for Tesla, which is, frankly, a little bit exciting too, but that's only because of our coverage. It's been so good. Clearly, that means the stock must go up. So today we're going to have a chat with Jeff Lutz, the magi of supply, the magician of logistics, the guru of Sapluru, I suppose. I'm Brian. Welcome to Futuraza. Jeff, it's so good to see you. It's been too long.
Yeah.
Now,
with you.
for those who don't know, tell us your background in supply chain and logistics that makes you qualified to speak here today.
Well, there's a lot of people that have great careers, and I respect all of them. But yeah, in terms of mine, I've spent 2 decades really developing the supply chain that's used in smartphones today, and including originally kind of ramping the whole supply base for Android. I worked at Motorola, Google, Lenovo, and I was kind of in the role of designing my team and I were in the role of designing the processes for how the product is made. So not the traditional, planning, logistics, so forth of it, although everything we did kind of spanned all that. But think of kind of the engineering and program management process arm of how products are made, and then actually having to execute it and then export it to factories. That's my background.
It's so insane to think how, and we saw it firsthand during the supply crunch. If you have 99% of a car, you have no car. So getting all the pieces to work is a little bit important, I suppose. So what we're talking about today is what Tesla is doing differently with the Cybercab in terms of the supplies, in terms of the parts, in terms of the materials they're actually using. So let's start with the batteries. Can they get them?
Absolutely. Yeah, Tesla has unbelievable leverage within the global supply base for batteries. They've got volume leverage. You'll hear me talk about this a lot. Some people talk about volume leverage. They look at the company and they see how much product they ship in aggregate versus looking at how much volume they ship per product and per part number. And I think that's where Tesla's winning a lot, because there's a lot of auto companies that ship higher volume than Tesla. But when you look at how few models Tesla has, it really benefits them in the sourcing world, in the supply chain world. That volume per part number thing is huge, and it's only going to get bigger. So the conversations that Tesla is having with prospective suppliers, if you're a Model Y supplier today, thank you. And oh, by the way, it only gets better, bigger and better. So here's the kind of the hill we need you to take for Cybercab, and together, can we get you more volume, and can you get us greater efficiencies to get us to this price point?
It's exactly that. A lot of manufacturers have said, we're going to need a cajillion batteries from you in 3 years. And that company goes out and says, great, I'm going to build the factory right now. And then halfway through it, they go, you know what? Actually, I don't think we're going to do that. I just put out $2 billion and you're not going to buy the batteries. That makes Tesla a supplier of choice for sure. And like you said, even though Tesla's only moving a couple million cars a year compared to Volkswagen's, 8 to 10, that 8 to 10 is spread out across how many models? And there are parts in common, but not enough. Not enough. Tesla's definitely getting priority pricing. Because it's battery agnostic, that means what? What does that do to help the ability to crank out series volume of Cybercab?
Yeah, it gives them choice in terms of technology. It also looks like Tesla may be doing some of their own development within this space in terms of battery tech, and that's a supply chain strategy. That's a company strategy as well, which is to always have the ability to. You're not saying you're actually doing it, but you have the ability to internally manufacture what may become an external bottleneck, and either an external bottleneck in terms of like the supply is unavailable, or an external bottleneck that the cost structure doesn't align with what you need. And so what Tesla does in these relationships, they're like, look, suppliers, I need everything I can possibly get from you, and I'm going to take it. When I put the orders out, I tend to take the material, and Tesla has a history of that. Some of the others in the world that you can look at, GM, Ford, and others, are literally not only pulling out of the construction deals, but they're pulling out of a lot of the long-term supply commits. and they're really leaving these suppliers holding the bag. So Tesla has a good relationship. They have a good reputation and a good relationship within their supply base. So they've got the flexibility in terms of their own internal development. They have the flexibility also to work with multiple partners. So they multi-source in these slots. They don't rely on one partner for one slot. They multi-source. And finally, what Tesla is doing with the rest of the Cybercab, which I think you've done a very good job, Brian, highlighting, which is how do you reduce the mass? How do you reduce the size so you actually don't need the same size battery that you required in the prior generation?
Yeah, you could put a 35 kilowatt hour battery in this and get the kind of range you're looking for. And that means that for every one Hummer that's made, you could make 7 Cybercabs. And
That's stunning.
And we say that like it's a big number. I'd say for every one Hummer they make in 2028, there will be a million Cybercabs. It's not
Yeah.
going to be, no one's buying that thing. It's a joke. I think they sold some internally. They've sold a handful to people who rent them out on Turo. I've seen 1 or 2 real owners in real life, but it's a novelty. It's not practical for any purpose. In terms of the materials that go into a battery, there are some that are harder to get than others. Nickel, cobalt, manganese. What if we could, they've said they're going to build this globally. Do you think they'll be using NMC in China or go straight to LFP batteries?
It's hard to say. I think there's a couple of factors. One is you have to think about when this is going to be in mass production. They're making the decision. They've already made the decision, I'm assuming. But you also have to have some flexibility to understand what's an oversupply situation, what's in an undersupply situation, and you have to have that flexibility built into your product. If you don't have that flexibility actually built in, your suppliers know that. They sniff all this stuff out, and then you really get cornered in the negotiation. So I'd like to think that they're going LFP, but it's hard to say.
So we've seen Tesla buying batteries for 3Y, S, and X from Panasonic in Japan, from Panasonic joint venture in Reno, making their own in-house. We've seen them getting them from LG for the European and some of the Chinese market. They're buying batteries from just about anyone. And even when you're using LG cells, unlike GM, who had a little bit of a flamey issue, it works. It just works. So
yeah,
that means what I hear you saying is, just build the cars, the batteries will follow.
Yeah, we're in a pretty good spot from a battery macro perspective right now when you look at it from a supply perspective and you look at the cost per kilowatt hour. But I want to make one thing known. For something like a Cybercab and the volume structure it's going to be at, Tesla will probably employ something like a 2+1 sourcing model. And it could be 3+2. It could be a number of different permutations, but essentially you award 2 main providers, somewhere in the area of 40 to 45% share. And then you have some challenger brand. And there's some of these Chinese players that are ramping up. There's some other players in South Korea ramping up. And you have this challenger version that you award them 10%. All right, look, your costs aren't there, or we're concerned about your supply continuity. But if you can get to this bar, we may actually move you from that minority share to one of the primary majority shares, and then the 2 primary majorities know that they have this disruptive competitor below them, so it keeps them competitive. So I imagine that Tesla is employing a strategy something like this. Tesla also obviously has their own internal development and their internal production, which they can also leverage in the conversation. But yeah, there's a pretty wide open field. There's a lot of supply available. And Tesla is known in the supply base as a reliable OEM partner. Like, they take what they order, basically.
And that is pretty critical. We saw, so when you were saying that they bring a lot of these competencies in-house, we've seen the legacy car companies farming all this out, and it's great. Isn't this wonderful? Magna's willing to do this part of the software for us so we don't have to think about it. But then you've got 5 different batches and all these different stacks, and none of them are happy to talk to each other. And it really comes to light during the supply crunch when the little microcontrollers weren't available, and Tesla was able to cycle through 19 different ones and just say, just ship it. We'll have the firmware written by the time it gets here. And the cars kept moving out.
Yeah. Yeah, and Brian, it's more than just their approach to their supply base and how they design it. It's their development model, like it's their engineering model of selecting, like, these are the things that we're going to develop internally, and these are the things we're going to work on with partners. And Tesla had to make that decision very early on because there weren't many partners that would want to work with them and work in the EV industry. And now that, you know, the tables have turned where it's actually desirable to get you get a Model Y part award, you're getting potentially the single greatest size and volume of a part award available in the auto industry. And so, and what's everything to suppliers is ROIC, return on invested capital. I make a jig, I make a fixture, I make a piece of CapEx in my factory, I bring labor in to build you something. I want the greatest return on that investment possible. And the way I get that is a continuous volume signal, continuous demand signal, and the potential for growth. And that's what I get when I work with Tesla. They all talk. They all know this.
Yes, they definitely do. It's a small industry. I used to have a couple of Bobs from Bob's Bibs and Bobs who would give me some information from time to time, but unfortunately one of them retired and the other has moved to another industry. So if you're a Bob out there watching this now and have inside information you'd like to share with me, I am available for that. Now, you've seen a bunch of videos. You've seen how the Cybercab is going to be built, what it's made of, all that. Comparing a traditional car, or better yet, a traditional car plus all the junk that Waymo's going to glue onto it. Tell me about the difference and how much that simplification is going to help in terms of the supply chain.
Yeah, everything comes back to unit economics, which is how much does it cost? You know, how much is the bucket of parts that the vehicle is made of or the product is made of? And then how do you take that bucket and you transfer it to the finished product landed in front of the consumer on their driveway? So there's two things in kind of two big chunks in unit economics. There's actually a third around the cost of sales, but the two biggest chunks in terms of making a product are how much do the components cost and what's the cost to do the transformation at the various stages. And it looks like Cybercab has made a lot of decisions around part elimination, part combinations, and part elimination. And that's the highest order bit. I told this story about the badge, you know, the logo on any kind of product. In the smartphone world, we would spend, especially on the tier of the product, we would spend a lot of money engineering that badge, you know, to make it's usually something that's shiny, high gloss, high polish. It's usually made of a material that or a substrate that is capable of taking those decoration processes. There's usually adhesive functions involved. There's usually alignment functions involved, and there's usually verification functions involved of that alignment. And so when people think about the logo, like, well, how much can this logo actually cost? Well, there's the cost to make the logo, but then there's the actual cost to actually get it in its final place on the vehicle. And those two costs combined together, you know, can be significant. So your highest order bit in the equation is eliminating the part. And then the next highest order bit is like, can these two things be combined or simplified? And that's where a lot of energy is spent. But a lot of companies make the mistake of actually engineering a part that shouldn't actually even be in the product. And I think that's, you know, bringing it back to the Cybercab, I think they've done a lot on part elimination. I think you've spoken about it. Things that you talked about, like the number of windows, pieces of glass in a vehicle. Just you can go at every single vertical slice across the vehicle, and there's so many countless examples of this. And that part elimination is key, because not only are you're not buying the part and you're not doing the transformation costs I described, but then you don't have the professionals that are doing the sourcing. You don't have the professionals that are out in the field with the supplier doing the qualification of the part, or in the Tesla factory doing the qualification and the engineering of the process, because it doesn't need to exist. And those costs add up significantly, and that hits the operating line in many respects. So, I mean, we can go through countless examples in the vehicle, but it looks like the highest order bit was mass and part elimination.
And there's no warranty repair on parts that don't exist. The rear window will not malfunction in a Cybercab. There is no rear window.
Right.
And getting down to, they've done a pretty beautiful job of it. I get a lot of comments from people who haven't had the opportunity to see one in person, which is almost everyone. Very few people have seen them in person. Fewer still have been inside one.
Right.
Making assumptions about what it is that they would understand if they could see it. They say, oh, the screen is so big, I'm going to bang my knee on it. I've never seen anyone do that. I certainly didn't bang my knee on it. It's very comfortable. Well, it's going to be too hard to get in and out without a handle. No, it's not a bucket. You just swing your feet and stand up. It's really, they've thought of absolutely everything. And the big examples I use are, I did ask them about the motor. Is it going to be rare earth free? And without giving me a direct answer, he said that the statements that Elon made at was that Investor Day or
Investor Day? Yeah.
Yeah. Where he said, we have a design for it that will work. He said that remains Tesla's commitment moving forward, which tells me that if at all possible, and I think it will be possible, this motor will be made without it. Rare earths are getting harder to get. China doesn't want to export gallium and a number of other, limited supply materials around the world.
Gallium, germanium. Yep.
Yeah. And this means that you can build it anywhere because the materials are going to be readily available, common commodities.
Yeah. Tesla talked publicly about, to your point, Brian, about the motor development for this next generation vehicle. They talked about it on Investor Day. They talked about it ensuingly after, and they hinted at, this is publicly out there, kind of their approach to developing something new like this, which is there's not just an engineering team, a supplier realization team, a factory team. They're not kind of just separate. There are separate organizations inside of Tesla, but to make this motor, they got together as one team and they sat around one table together for months, and if not longer, to get this solution developed. And that sounds easy, but it's actually quite unusual in most companies. Most companies have functional silos. They have a supply chain team. They have a DFX team. They have all these different functional silos around the company, the supplier realization team. And all of a sudden something gets tossed over the wall and says, hey, look, we want the supplier to do this from a development. And the supplier realization person says, well, they can, but they can only hold it at this tolerance and at this yield. And then these things kind of get lost in the noise. But that team was brought around a table and said, look, you have to be production ready January 1st, 2025. Okay, so you have a date. You have your costs need to be below $1,000 for this motor. That was the second thing. The third thing is your performance has to be, X, Y, Z. And it wasn't just in classical companies that those targets are given to the engineering and the program management office, and then they figure it out how to get the rest of the company together. But the way Tesla works is it's just one team that has to deliver that motor across all the different functions. That's a very special thing to kind of maintain that small startup culture, but it's very powerful. And that's how that motor was developed. So that is one of the modules we talk about for the unbox process that's going to be in the Cybercab. But I believe that they're going to try to pull some of a module like that forward for these new lower cost vehicles. So, and it all comes full circle back to our original conversation, which is they're going to get more of their vehicles on the same part number family, and they're going to drive more and more volume to fewer and fewer number of part numbers. That's platforming.
Exciting. It's exciting to see it when you look at the fact that a Model 3 had 380 body pieces, a Model Y with a structural pack had 180, and now the Cybercab has just 80. You can see how much shorter the factory is going to be, how nobody's going to be able to compete with this. And when you're talking about volume pricing, which is something that I just hadn't kind of really thought about, the volume on this is going to be tremendous. It doesn't have the same door handles as the 3 and Y. That's okay. We've already got volume pricing on those. This don't have door handles. You just get in. So,
and you're always, by the way, you're always better to do that. By the way, you're always better to eliminate the part than the platform onto something if you have the choice.
Yes. Why spend time perfecting something that you shouldn't have in the first place? Yeah, it's an exciting thing. Guys, in the comments, what did we miss? What did we misunderstand? Should I bring Jeff back? I don't know. He seems like a busy guy. It was a pleasure chatting with you, as always, Jeff. And everybody else, like, subscribe, do the usual, and stay tuned, stay juicy. And I cannot wait to hear from Jeff on the Flippity Flop.